And welcome to Unit 2 HRM in Context. So as with the first unit and the other units, we have a number of learning objectives from the course manual, and you can see on this particular unit then we have 3 objectives. The first one then is to outline what a SWOT and pest analysis is and its relevance to human resources. Complete a pest analysis for your organisation. And then finally, the final objective is to identify what the flexible view of the firm is and how organisations might achieve this flexibility. So the focus of this short video on Unit 2 then is to sort of go over the SWOT and PESTEL and to have a look at some of the background in terms of influences on HRM, and then finally we'll have a look at the flexible view of the firm from Atkinson's model. So in terms of SWOT and PESTEL, and obviously these are two particular tools that you may have seen before. You would have seen them on Unit 1 in terms of the HRM system, in terms of the visual model with all the practices. We had on the top left and top right, we had the SWOT and PESTEL, and of course they're done on a regular basis as part of a HR department or the shared service centre or whatever HR system is set up. Obviously both tools, the SWOT and PESTEL, are very, very important. So a SWOT then typically analyses the internal organisation, but the SWOT analysis then develops strategies that align the organisational strengths with external opportunities, identifies internal weaknesses, and acknowledges threats that could affect organisational success. The PESTEL analysis then, the second tool, which provides an overview of external factors that may infringe the organisational performance and thereby provides helpful indicators for HR management to act upon. So we can see there under the SWOT we have strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and then with the PESTEL analysis it's political aspects, economic, social, cultural, technological, environment and legal. So typically as part of strategic thinking or strategy focus, we might use PESTEL first, and then once we've done that then we obviously look at the external environment, and then the elements of the PESTEL then help us with a SWOT because of the opportunities and threats, of course, as you can see. So in terms of the HRM function then, PESTEL influences, you can see here that we have here the external environment, and then we have the elements of PESTEL, and then in the middle then we have the internal environment, where we have is made up of, say, the culture, the internal politics, management style, work design, strategy, performance, human resource management there in the middle, and of course you can have see these functions then, or activities, or even call them, practices, as you can see there. So one example then of the element of PESTEL and how it influences, you can see so technology, take that, and then the influences there of that will be quite significant on things like recruit selection in recent years. So things like recruitment, online e-recruitment, and then even the whole idea of, say, selection too, in terms of online psychometric testing, online ability testing, and even to the extent of going back to recruitment of, say, auditioning, having to do a video on yourself as part of the recruitment process. In terms of other aspects of technology then on HR practices, in terms of learning and development, of course, there's been quite a significant influence there, effect in terms of online learning, using mobile technology, e-learning platforms, virtual learning environments. All of those things have really shaped the way that we do things in terms of learning, training and development. If we look at other aspects such as performance, for example, or even in terms of work design, of course with performance appraisal systems there could well be a platform that you may have to use to give feedback on somebody else in the workforce. And even then, obviously, with work design too, technology's had a huge impact in terms of how we work, working from home, um, remote working, logging into certain platforms or systems to work. So again, it's had a huge effect, and it's such an effect actually that there is a sort of an area called HRM, which has evolved quite considerably over the last few years. In terms of legislation, of course, the legal side of things, again, there's been lots of changes over the last few years, from part-time working all the way through to changes to the composition of the external bodies, like the Workplace Relations Commission, the equality bodies, for example. So again, that's extremely important to consider too. But in particular, obviously, labour law in terms of the Organisation of Working Time Act, how agencies operate, all those things have a considerable impact on the HR function, HR practices, of course. In terms of economics, of course, the whole idea of the economy, and typically when there's an upturn in the economy, that can have a big effect in terms of things like bonuses, and affects things like rewards. But when there is a downturn, of course, that can affect remuneration rewards quite considerably. In the last recession, just as a quick note, in terms of rewards, recognition seems to have been the most important one. But more recently now, it's to do with things like profit sharing seems to be, and gain sharing seems to be an important part of organisational culture and what people want. In terms of the elements of society then, again, over the last sort of 10, 20 years, there's been a considerable shift towards work-life balance and flexible working, and people having that flexibility. And again, it's affected so many things. So in terms of things like rewards in particular, companies operating a unlimited vacation policy, all the way through to work design and employee relations, where well-being has been a considerable sort of focus for organisations. And I think it's also had an effect on management style too, in terms of the whole idea of HRM and commitment, and it just seems to be a bit of research that's focused on this in terms of more of a democratic type style, and in particular, as society has changed, they've probably looked for more autonomy and empowerment in the work, and again, that's a big focus in lots of the HR literature. So I think overall, though, the HR department's HR function obviously needs to keep an eye on these elements of the PESTEL, and in particular, I think one of the big things that's arisen last couple of years has been technology and the focus of that, and how it's affected work and how we do work and where we work from. So of course, the ongoing focus of a SWOT and PESTEL are very important, and they both interact with each other. So in terms of a reflection, what are the most important influences from PESTEL facing your organisation, in particular from a human resources viewpoint, and what action should the organisation take to manage them? And then moving on then to the final part of the unit, which is looking at the flexible view of the firm. And the Atkinson model's been around for quite a while, and basically, as you can see here, it's organised into a couple of different areas. And the central focus of the model is to aspire to what we call functional and numerical flexibility. So we have a core group, and then we have a peripheral group. It's actually organised into first and second, but I normally just say there's a core group and then a peripheral group, and then we have this outside element too, which can also be part of the peripheral too. But the idea of the model is that we can expand and contract pretty quickly and have an agile type organisation based on this focus of flexibility. And with the functional flexibility, this means is that we have a core group, which is our primary labour market. And from a functional perspective, we have a number of members of staff employees that are highly skilled, highly trained, multi-skilled. And thinking back to Watson's engine components case study, that was one of the things that they needed in a highly competitive environment was multi-skilling and flexibility to be able to operate quickly and to change between different roles. And so in this case, the core group have that functional flexibility. So functional roles, from marketing all the way to sales to wherever, that could be used at pretty quickly to change. And so there's high training, high development, and the primary core group seem to be a permanent fixture. Um, with the peripheral group, then of course it's all to do with having elements of staff that are there which help us to expand and contract pretty quickly. And this is the peripheral group, the secondary labour market, and it's typically made up of part-time people who may be on short-term contracts, seasonal workers. And then we have the other element then, which are people who are subcontractors, agency workers, temporary people, and then we could also maybe outsource too. The whole idea of the numerical flexibility is that we can expand and contract pretty quickly. But of course, one of the issues of this is that it creates a us and them mentality. So how do you integrate the primary and secondary groups? And again, that can cause problems. And how do you manage the whole potential issues around labour law, for example, in terms of discrimination around this model that typically could happen? So you have to be very careful. Of course, this model's from the 1980s, and we're in 2020 now, so you do have to sort of have a business case for decisions that you do make. Of course, we've seen more and more increased outsourcing, and again, and even with agency type work, it can be expensive. So organisations have to make some big decisions in terms of that. And in recent years, we've seen some examples of, so for example, Aer Lingus would have done the opposite to this model actually. A few years ago, they basically recruited or maintained or kept their preferral group as part of the business focus, and let a lot of, actually retained, I should say, the preferral group, and let a lot of staff go that were part of the core group. With Irish Ferries then, a good few years ago too, they released their core group and re-recruited for those outside of Ireland, but they kept a lot of their preferral group as well. So in terms of a final reflection then, I'd like you to think about to what extent has your organisation followed Atkinson's model of the flexible firm.